Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Juliet Foster and welcome to Day 2 of the second Riyadh International Humanitarian Forum. Let's go back to yesterday because we discussed the humanitarian development challenges from conflict and climate change, the impact on the different agencies involved, and how that's leading them to examine their working relationships with each other and their approach towards man-made and natural disasters. Well, today we're going to further broaden the discussion parameters by looking at specific groups of people and how they're served in times of crisis. And that is reflected in the title of our panel, Women, Children and People with Special Needs in Crisis and the Humanitarian Work Challenges. Now, tragically, humanitarian crises are a fact of life, and the impact on those on the receiving end is often disproportionate. If we take, for example, figures from the United Nations and its partner organisations, nearly 168 million people will require humanitarian assistance and protection in 2020. That translates as 1 person in 45, the highest in decades. Now, it's a figure that should be familiar to most of us because it was raised during one of our panel discussions, the opening discussion, in fact. Now, regardless of whether a crisis is man-made or the result of a natural disaster, there are certain groups of people who will always be particularly vulnerable. Disasters have killed or maimed record numbers of children, forcing survivors to flee their homes into an economic and social wilderness. 1 in 5 people in conflict zones have mental health problems, while statistically, women and girls are at a higher risk of sexual and gender-based violence. Women and girls with physical disabilities, or those from ethnic minorities or low castes, are especially vulnerable, a reality reinforced by those very social labels. A 2016 study found that adolescent girls with the physical and intellectual disabilities are more likely to face, and I quote, multiple intersecting and often mutually reinforcing forms of discrimination and oppression which are exacerbated in situations of crisis. Now, that susceptibility is further underscored by the roles of women and girls. Let's take one example. In the Sahel, a scarcity of resources has meant that women and girls are forced to walk longer distances to fetch fuel and water, increasing their exposure to harassment and sexual assault. Now, one way around this was for the girls to collect the water at night. Yet, ironically, that heightened the risks to their safety. What it reveals is that gender-based violence should not be treated as a standalone issue, given how it connects with sustainable development goals. In 2018, 1 in 6 children, that's around 415 million, were living in conflict zones. That's more than double the number recorded in 1999. Now, that trend reinforces the case for initiatives to end preventable infant deaths, support healthy brain development in younger children, including those with disabilities, while driving economic recovery and peace building. Let's not forget that the first 1,000 days in a child's life are vital for nurturing and learning, hence the value of early intervention programs and early childhood development initiatives focusing on education, access to healthcare, and good nutrition for both the mother and the child. To quote a 2018 report from the Early Childhood Peace Consortium, by intervening early and engaging with children's families, early childhood development services offer a unique opportunity to make a cost-effective and sustainable impact on interrupting cycles of poverty and violence. Don't forget that women are vital in helping to make a success of development and humanitarian strategies, which is why their economic empowerment is essential, as it is key to breaking those very cycles of dependence. So the question is, what does this mean for humanitarian agencies and their strategies? Do they overlook other categories of need? Should they revisit the definition of vulnerable? Plenty to think about in that overview. Let me introduce the panel. I'd like to start first with Dr. Rima Saleh. If you care to join us on the stage, Dr. Saleh. And let me tell you a little bit about her. She is a former Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF. that is the United Nations Children's Fund, and she's also chair of the Early Childhood Peace Consortium. In fact, I quoted from your report, so thank you so much for that. She's also a former Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary-General to the UN mission in the Central African Republic and Chad, serving on the high-level panel on peace operations. So thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate that. His Excellency Dr. Tariq Al Ghourg, please join us on the stage. And Dr. Tariq Al Ghourg is the Chief Executive Officer at Dubai Cares and member of its Board of Directors, a role to which he was appointed in 2009. Under his direction, Dubai Cares is recognized as a best case practitioner and global leader in education program design and innovation. So thank you so much for being with us. The Honourable Frances Townsend. She's a former Homeland Security Advisor to the US President George W. Bush, as well as former chair of the Homeland Security Council. So please come and join us. I'm now going to gather my breath here because Frances has a very impressive resume. She joined the White House from the US Coast Guard, where she served as Assistant Commandant for Intelligence. Prior to that, she spent 13 years at the US Department of Justice in a number of senior roles under multiple administrations. And currently she serves as EVP, so that's Executive Vice President, excellent, of Worldwide Government, Legal and Business Affairs at McAndrews & Forbes, an American diversified holding company working across their portfolio companies, focusing on international, legal, compliance and business development issues. So thank you so much for being with us, Frances. I'd also like to invite to the stage Dr. Amal Al-Habdan, so please come and join us. And to give you a little bit of background about this unique lady, she is head of King Salman Relief Community Support Unit. And I know that one of the issues that she's very keen to discuss is the charity's Child Soldiers Rehabilitation Programme, in which she is actively involved. I'd also like to stress as well that if you want more information about that programme, you'll not just hear about it in the conversation that we're going to have, but there is literature available as well. I'd also like to invite to the stage Dr. Padmini Murthy. Thank you so much. Now, Dr. Murthy is a physician, activist, and professor and global health director at New York Medical College. For the past 28 years, she has practiced medicine and public health in various countries. And in 2016, she was awarded the Elizabeth Blackwell Medal by the American Medical Women's Association for her contribution to the field of women in medicine. So thank you so much for being with us. And finally, could you please give a very warm welcome to Lina or Sheikh Omar Majoub. Please come and join us on the stage. Now, she became the Sudanese Minister of Labour and Social Development in 2019 in the transitional cabinet of Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. And she's interested in promoting corporate social responsibility and is co-founder of the Impact Hub Khartoum website, which aims to provide, and I quote, a cooperative environment for entrepreneurs, intellectuals, and innovators. So all of you, thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to be with us. Let me give you an idea of what's going to happen next, because I'm going to be speaking with our panelists individually, but we've agreed amongst us that we're going to interrupt in the nicest possible way, because we want to get a conversation going here from which all of us can learn. This is interactive for us, and we want it to be interactive for you as well. Now, you, the audience, you will get your chance to take part, and there are people around here who will have microphones. So if you want to ask a question or perhaps make a comment, then raise your hand. Somebody will give you a microphone. And all I ask is that if you're going to ask a question, then please keep it brief. And when you do speak to us, please give your name and also the organisation that you represent. So I'm going to dash over here to my chair. I'm not very good with technology, so I think the technology has gone on strike. But whilst we correct it, let's begin the process, because I want to start first with Dr. Rima Salah. Now, I know that early childhood development is your issue, and what I want to know about is why these early childhood development programs are important in times of crisis, and more specifically, I want to understand the science behind it. Talk us through that. I think there's a switch. There's a switch.
Thank you very
Brilliant.
much for the question. You mentioned some statistics of women and children that are affected by conflict, but I want to tell you also that 250 million children under 5 years of age, we know, in low and middle income countries and in situations of war and conflict, will not reach their development potential, as they will be met by a range of risks and adversities such as poverty, lack of learning opportunities, abuse, and neglect. And also this is compounded by the conflicts, violent conflicts and displacement. We know today we have 70 million people that are displaced, and mostly women and children. In 2018 alone, 29 million babies, almost 1 in 5, were born into conflict-affected areas. 50 million children, according to UNICEF, have been uprooted from their homes, and 28 million, half of them were forced to flee from conflict and violence and insecurity. So we know that conflict and displacement are risk multipliers for children. We rightly are haunted by the plight of families and children in displacement and under conflict. But what should haunt us more and concern us more is really that the lasting negative impact of deprivation and violence on children. This will eventually not affect the children, but affect the children, their families, societies, and communities. Why? You asked me about the science. Advances in development neuroscience are really causing a revolutionary shift in the way we think about child development, as we learn more about the impact of both negative and positive experiences. We know and we realize that in the first year of life, the brain grows at a pace of 700 to 1,000 new neural connections per second, a pace that is never achieved again. It is early life experiences that from preconception onward that determine the capacity of the brain and has influence on the physical health of the child. And all these adversities will affect the lifespan of the child, particularly when the child is exposed to what to call toxic stress, which are the biological response to adversities. And this include emotional, behavioral problems, which can continue for generations. We didn't know this before. And so it is so important then to really invest in the early childhood development in all times, but particularly in times of crisis, as the intervention can provide immediate results and mitigate the impact of conflict and displacement, and provide a foundation really for improved outcome later in life, and really is a path to more peaceful and cohesive societies.
I'm glad you've mentioned the scientific case for this, because too often when we talk about children who've been traumatized, we don't associate it with the science, the actual impact on brain patterns, and also the fact that that trauma can be generational, so it perpetuates itself, the destruction.
Yes, yes, and also the child, of course, it affects, as we said, the child, but also it affects the family, it affects the community, and it affects the parents, and we know in times of conflict, the whole fabric of society is disrupted, and the institutions are lost. Even the family institution is not strong enough. But also during conflict, and when I met many people and I went to many refugee camps, and you know, the protection systems are eroded. But at that time, who is going to protect the children? Of course, the family. But at that time, also the family are under stress, and they cannot give the nurturing care that they should without really empowering them to do that.
And let's stay with this idea of family, because in that introduction, one of the things which I tried to point out was that women and other caregivers are very important within the family structure, and especially in the humanitarian development structure. So how important are they in making sure that initiatives that you've been responsible for building are going to succeed? Because there is a massive generational responsibility. That's why they have to succeed.
Yes. I met mothers who are so worried that they cannot take care of the children, that they cannot give them the care that they should have. Because, as I said, their exposure to stress and challenges, they are not able to do it anymore. So that's why UNICEF and other actors in early childhood development during crisis have to empower, particularly mothers and parents and families. How do we empower them? Because the science also highlights the importance of positive parenting, that it's very important and that it reinforces the evidence, the stimulation, the caregiving, the bond between the parents and the children. So it's very important. The parents are very important. So considering this is really building programs to empower mothers, parents, particularly mothers. And those programs should be multi-leveled. When I say multi-leveled, which means the mother, the family, and the community. It's so important. Early childhood development is an inclusive program. It is not for the child alone. It is for the mother, it's for the parent, for the society. But those programs also, they should be safe, they should be nurturing, inclusive, and multi-sectoral. They should have health, nutrition, safety. They should also include peace-building components.
And that was the point I was also going to ask you about as well, because it's very unusual to a certain extent to associate childhood development with peace-building. And I really want to know how that works, how it connects.
Yes, the peace building.
Yeah, the peace building with childhood development.
Why is it so important? Because also evidence shows and the science shows that the link between the early years of life and the early life environment, and also it substantiates the link between violence prevention and the development of pro-social behavior in the child. And so this can lead to more peaceful homes and communities. So the good news and the hope is that if we really invest in early children, then we can change the tide of violence. We can really change the tide of violence, and this is a path to social cohesion. And I met mothers, if I give you examples, for example, from Lebanon, from Afghanistan, from Northern Ireland even, that told me how much the programs, the social services for the children in the community benefited them. They understand more the children, they understand more their neighbors, and this really affected to have cohesive societies around them, but also peaceful homes. So my appeal to all of us is that if we want to build a world of peace and development, we should start very early. Investing in the early years of life is really very important.
And I want to stick with that theme of investment, in fact, because just to put this in context as well, everybody has been nodding in agreement because you've answered the case so fluently and it really does link up. And I know that one of those who was also note-taking, in fact, was His Excellency Dr. Tarek Gurg. Now, as I said in your introduction, you're from Dubai Cares. Now, this is a global philanthropic organization that was founded by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. And I know that you're really keen on the idea of the smart investment, early childhood development. So give us your insight on that important phase in children's life and why it really is the smart investment, the right way to go.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. When we're talking about a child, let's not forget the coronavirus mixed with it. I'm just kidding. So.
I'd rather you don't dwell on that too heavily, please. I think we had quite a bit of that yesterday.
I'm going to take a deep dive on two main points of what Rima mentioned for the 1,000 days, mainly about the neural connection and even about the mothers. But I just want to put some numbers and statistics together so we know what the situation is in fragile settings and humanitarian settings as well. We have 5 million pregnant women in fragile and humanitarian context. We have 22 million newborns. We have 33 million caregivers. And we have 34 million women on productive age. We also have 75 million children under the age of 6, which 50% of them are in the MENA region. This is the situation, and they all need assistance. We have to take care of them because it's not only about the child, it's even about the mother from conception until birth. And that is the time where that fetus in the mother's womb starts developing. So if we're talking about early childhood development, we have to talk about the mother taking care of herself. Now, here in this normal setting, I don't think that's an issue. But if you go to fragile context and you go to a humanitarian context, these mothers are not educated. A lot of these mothers have been refugees probably for 15 years or 17 years, that their parents are dead and they didn't have any education on how to take care of a child. So who will give them that knowledge? So the first thing we have to do is putting the mother into the context and educating her and training her and passing policies to support her. And then comes the child, and we're talking about the first 1,000 days that Rima spoke about. And I'm going to take deep dives into two main points. We have to understand how a brain child functions, first of all. Every second, as Rima mentioned, there are between 700 to 1,000 neurons getting generated in neural threads. And we have millions of neural threads being generated at the same time. When a child touches something, when a child smells something, when a child smiles or cries, that becomes a memory in the child's brain. How does it become a memory? Because you have two neural threads and you have two neurons connecting to each other, and that's called a neural connection. And the more neural connection there are in a brain, the more the brain develops. And when I talk develops, I mean not only cognitively, but even size-wise. And that's how a child doesn't become stunted. That's very important to understand. And the more information you give that child, the more the brain develops, and it becomes like a sponge. The more water you put in a sponge, it will pump, and the less water you give, it will become hard and crumble, and we don't want these neural threads to crumble. So that's the importance of why we have to help the children. We have to give them the proper care, attention, nutrition, and health. And a lot of people say, yeah, but he's a child, he doesn't understand, and it's fine, don't worry, he'll grow up and he'll understand. No, it's the first 3 years of the child's life. That's where you have to give him the care and attention.
So it's incredibly holistic, and just to, again, put what you're saying in context, I mean, you guys put your money where your mouth is, basically, because you've been investing heavily in education in emergencies. And what I'm really fascinated about is really how you can put these practices into operation in an environment that is so incredibly fragile, which is broken, where people are concerned about surviving, where you are dealing with mothers, fathers, children who are extremely traumatized.
So what's the question?
The question is, how do you put these practices into operation in those fragile, broken environments?
Well, first you have to have a holistic approach to it. And putting everything into a holistic approach is not an easy game. You have different actors, you have host governments, you have the actual government, where if it's a refuge situation, so you will have the original country that has to play a part of the care of these children and women. Let's not forget the women, because Whenever we talk about ECD, we only talk about the child and we forget about the woman. And putting all of this into context, let's not forget, the children of today are the youth of tomorrow. The youth of today are the adults of tomorrow and the future of their nations. And if we can't give the right education to the children today, we're not going to have proper future youths. And the youth of today, because they missed out so much in education, it's costing us so much money and so much training, and we're still not getting the quality that we want. But the youth of tomorrow, which are the children of today, if you put the right investment, you're going to save money in the future and you're going to have less training to those. So building a holistic approach to this context is very vital, it's very important. And later on, I can even share with you on a holistically approached model on how we can solve the problem. Unless you want me to speak about it, I can connect some dots in terms of having a collaboration on the ground. If you do not have the right actors on the ground, if you don't have the body and the framework and passing policies that will connect all of these children and women together in fragile context, have you ever heard the woman having right to go and breastfeed in case she has a job? No. Do they have the right training to know what kind of vaccinations that she has to give her child? No. Do fathers play a role in fragile context? Absolutely not. But it's very important to make them understand. So spreading awareness is very important, and connecting the community centers in these fragile contexts is very important, because you have community centers and no awareness, no education is happening on a community center level. And you can use the youth of today to convey this message, because that's the best tool.
So it perpetuates, basically. And we know that Dubai Cares, it has a footprint in 59 countries around the world. And what I'd like to know from you is for you to share, in fact, some examples of these ECD programs that have been very successful in terms of the innovation and the difference they've made in those fragile settings.
Sure. We have over 200 programs across 59 developing countries, and we're providing education and care to more than 20 million children. So I might focus on 2 or 3, which I personally visited. I visited at least 40 of these 59 countries, and maybe I'll start with Laos. Laos, there's a big problem in Laos where 80% of the population are ethnic minorities, 80%. And the rest are in urban cities, and one is in Vientiane itself, the capital, and then you have another major city. The issue with the ethnic minorities, they call them the ethnic minorities, but they're 80% of the population. I have no idea why they call them the minorities. But the only people who speak the Lao language are the people who are in the urban cities, which are 2 major cities. 80% of the population don't speak the Lao language. What has happened, 80% of students in grade 1 don't pass grade 1. They drop out. They have a huge problem. The Lao government called the World Bank to make a feasibility study, to make a research to see what's happening. The World Bank didn't know what was happening. They approached us and they said, could you be part of a big research to see what's happening there? So we said yes. We funded the World Bank, the research came out, and we realized that the curriculum, the education system, is all in the Lao language, and 80% of the people don't speak the Lao language. So the question is, should we train teachers who speak the Lao language to give them the ethnic minority language? They wouldn't accept. Can we get the Lao teachers, bringing them to the urban cities to train them on the Lao language so they can go back? They will never go back once they come to capitals and cities. So we have an issue. And that's when we got Plan International in, and we started tackling the issue, and it became an amazing program. And what has happened, we tackled the issue from pre-primary, getting them into catch-up schools and accelerated learning in summer so they can join P1 immediately after summer. We got Save the Children to handle and tackle the literacy issue. And 5 years passed by, we just finished it, and we're just finalizing the final research on this one to get the findings, and this will be embedded into the education system. Another example, Peru. In Peru, you have 50% of children who are aged between 0 to 3 who are anemic. They're anemic because they have iron deficiency. Why do they have iron deficiency? It's because they don't eat any proteins. That's all about education. And to tackle that issue, once you pass the age of 3 and you become stunted, you can't go back. You cannot reverse stunting. So what we're doing in Peru, we're having a program to prevent stunting of happening. And that's the program. We're giving them nutrition. We're also giving them the right care. We're teaching parents why they should care about the children. They have to talk to them. They have to feed them. They have to pat them on the back. You know why the mother takes a child, pats the child at the back, and the child stays quiet when he cries, but the father, when he takes the child, doesn't? There's a reason behind it. I'm a father of 4 daughters, by the way. And you know what's the reason?
What is the reason?
It's because of the heartbeat.
Ah.
9 months, the fathers would be
Right, they don't get the
It's
rhythm.
different, it's different. And it's the smell. And my wife keeps on insisting. She tells the nannies, don't put any perfume, because she wants the baby to smell mine and hers.
Right.
There is a connection. There is a brain. This has not been created randomly. It's been constructed properly, the brain. And that's what we're doing. We're teaching the parents the importance. And we have so many examples, but I can't share in this setting.
Sadly not. But I mean, look, the examples you've given us are really interesting because what they illustrate, and this is just my take from the outside looking in, is the value of these really good partnerships and the results which you get at the end of it. And of course, the importance of taking that holistic approach which you outlined. And I'm glad that you also brought the concept of empowerment into it as well, because female empowerment is essential in these crisis situations. But I guess that the question is how that empowerment is sustained, not during a crisis, but when it's over. And Frances Townsend, I want to bring you in as well, because you've seen the importance of role models in empowering women through your own involvement in humanitarian projects, because I have seen the pictures as well, and they're good. They're a testimony to what you do. But, you know, tell us about the value of that empowerment, because there are so many other aspects to it that I want to discuss with you as well.
So let me start by thanking His Majesty King Salman and the Crown Prince, Prince Mohammed, as well as Dr. Abdullah for inviting me. One might ask, how is it that a presidential advisor on counterterrorism is invited to a humanitarian conference? And I really am proof of what happens when you don't do the very things that everyone else, Dr. Rima and everyone is talking about, right? These children, when they are left in refugee camps and they are not tended to younger in life, and especially these refugee camps, are left and they are fertile ground for recruiting for terrorism. And that is exactly what we see happen. And when they become youth or they are recruited as child soldiers, they are taken advantage of. And so it was in December of 2018, I visited Yemen, and I visited one of the child soldier rehabilitation centers. I visited one of the prosthetic rehabilitation centers where they took children who had lost limbs and they fitted them with prosthetics. The children, it was really incredibly moving to see the light in these children's eyes, that these children who had been so lost, removed from the family home, removed from the sort of a loving, nurturing environment, brought together, put back and nurtured and taken out of sort of a violent environment and begun to be rehabilitated. It was really quite extraordinary, the power of that and that investment. These children didn't really care who provided it. They were just grateful. And I will tell you that the thing that I was most struck by was the the passage in the Quran that says, the Holy Quran that says, when you save a single life, it is as if you have saved all of humanity. You could see that in these children. It was by saving these lives, by the investment that the Saudi humanitarian effort makes in Yemen, these children go out into the world as a force for good, and it pays itself back in dividends in the future. I will tell you that it was the people that came to me to talk to me about this when I was in the Marab province, were the mothers. It was the women who came to me and told me what a difference it made to the family, to the women in their lives, that they had their children back. And it was extraordinary to me, the generational difference that the humanitarian effort made.
Yes, and so the women have got the family back, and it feeds their strength as well, the empowerment that we were talking about. And what fascinates me is that we talk about empowerment in the crisis situation, and we talk about having aid workers on the ground. Could they be part of that solution in terms of empowering women with gender-balanced teams where women are seen in roles of leadership?
Absolutely. So as part of the counterterrorism effort here in the kingdom, women were incorporated into the mabahith. They were incorporated in the rehabilitation effort as psychologists in the rehabilitation effort. Very early on, the kingdom understood that using women and incorporating women into the counterterrorism effort was very much a part of how you defeated the ideology. It was also in Afghanistan. I can remember visiting Afghanistan, and there was a women's anti-narcotics unit, and they were very much not only empowered, but they wanted not only to be a counter-narcotics unit, they wanted to be part of the national security apparatus where they could sit at the policy-making table and change the course of their country. And so, as with most things, if you give someone an opportunity at any level, they want to participate more, they want to do more. It was true in Afghanistan, and it's true here in the kingdom.
But then the question becomes, how do you give women the confidence that they can tap into that power and unleash their leadership skills? Because particularly if you're talking about communities that have been, well, they've been broken apart by conflict or a natural disaster, to actually come up to somebody and say, hey, you can do something, you can help to put the pieces back together, you can understand if they contradict that and say, no, I disagree, I just need to get by.
I think we often underestimate the power of role models. I think, the minister from Sudan, simply walking into a room, I came to find myself when I was in the White House, just walking in as a woman in a position of power was sort of so powerful to other women in other countries, in my own country. Here in the kingdom, when I would meet other women, it was inspiring, and it allowed other women to imagine themselves in that position in their country. It allowed them to imagine that they too could do that. And I think that we often underestimate the power of role models.
One thing I would actually, really trying to stitch everything together that you've been saying, and again, incorporating what we've heard from our other panelists, is whether it's time for the aid response to embed empowerment and female leadership in its humanitarian work. Because when people move on, those involved in development work, they've got to leave that structure behind. It has to survive, otherwise what was the point? So is that the next step, embedding these concepts into what they do?
Absolutely, and I think part of that is including sort of diverse teams in the humanitarian delivery effort, right? I mean, I think you need women leaders, you need diverse teams that's racially diverse, gender diverse, absolutely. I think that's got to be part of the humanitarian effort.
Okay, and I like the idea that you were talking about inner strength, because it is important if you are surviving in a conflict situation or where an area has been destroyed by a natural disaster, but it's really important as well when mothers or carers are looking after children who've been left traumatized by these very forces. We've looked at the importance of that child development, but one thing which does fascinate me is as a group of children within the body of children generally, and their plight is sometimes fleetingly referred to in media coverage, and I'm focusing specifically on child soldiers, and Francis, you touched on them. Now, King Salman Relief, as I said in my introduction, they have established a project that works with child soldiers, and Dr. Amar Habdan, you're involved in that project, and I want to know what it does, and more specifically, if you can give us an idea about the problems these children have. And for the benefit of the audience, Dr. Habdan will be speaking in Arabic, so if you just give us a little bit of time to put on our translation headphones so that we can follow you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome everybody. مثل ما حكت الدكتورة ريما والدكتور طارق وزملائي في الجلسة أنه في كثير من الاضطرابات اللي تصيب الأطفال لما يكونوا في حالات النزاع وفي الكوارث، ومن الاضطرابات اللي يمكن مهمة وخطيرة اللي هي اضطرابات الخوف واضطرابات ما بعد الصدمة. هذه من الاضطرابات اللي تؤثر على الطفل وتؤثر على نموه، وهي كلها هي انعكاسات لحالات الحروب واللي يتأثرون لها والنزاعات والتجنيد بالأصح. لما كنت في مأرب وقابلت يمكن زي ما تفضلت زميلتي مع الأطفال اللي موجودين، كان ما يستطيعون النوم والكوابيس بالنسبة لهم شيء مستمر. بعد ما تعرضوا لتجربة التأهيل في مركز الملك سلمان لتأهيل الأطفال المجندين، تحسنت هذه الاضطرابات وتلاشت ولله الحمد، وأصبحوا يعيشون إلى حد ما حياة طبيعية. الاضطرابات هذه حتى عدم ثقتهم في نفسهم، إحساسهم بوصمة العار، إحساس أهاليهم بوصمة العار أيضا من هذه تجنيدهم، هذه كلها مآسي يمر فيها الطفل المجند وأسرته. لذلك مركز الملك سلمان قام بهذا المشروع النوعي والفريد، واللي أشادت فيه الأمم المتحدة وأشادت فيه السيدة فيرجينيا غامبا، وقالت إنه هو من المشاريع الفريدة والنوعية اللي المفروض أنها تكون نموذج يحتذى فيه، لأنه هو حقوق الملكية الفكرية في مركز الملك سلمان، حيث تم عمل هذا البرنامج، عمل هذا التأهيل بحيث يكون في تدخل مع الطفل. وزي ما قالت الدكتورة ريما، احنا نتعامل مع منظومة ايكو سيستم، نتعامل مع الطفل والأسرة، المجتمع، المدرسة، حتى نضمن أنه يكون في إعادة تأهيل كاملة. هذا المشروع النوعي الفريد أصبح جزء الآن من الائتلاف البحثي اللي موجود تابع للأمم المتحدة لمكتب السيدة فيرجينيا غامبا، للاستفادة من التجارب والدراسات اللي تم العمل فيها. البرنامج يقوم على عملية التأهيل لهؤلاء الأطفال صحياً ونفسياً واجتماعياً، وإلحاقهم بالتعليم وإدماجهم في المجتمع. البرنامج يكون على مدى إيواء كامل في الفترة الأولى، ومن ثم يتحول إلى إيواء جزئي، بحيث في نهاية الأسبوع يذهبوا إلى أهاليهم، وفي الأخير يتم في متابعتهم بعد عودتهم إلى أسرهم. نوعية الانتقال من مرحلة إلى مرحلة قائمة على أسس مهنية، يتم في قياس الأطفال باحتياجاتهم الخاصة. كل طفل لما يحضر إلى المركز يتم فيه عملية قياس نفسي وشخصي، حتى نتأكد من الاضطرابات اللي موجودة لديه، وفي نفس التوازي نقوم بعمل ذلك مع أسرته، فحتى نكون على علم بماذا تجابه الأسرة، وحتى تكون الأسرة شريك معنا في خطة التأهيل، لأنه هذا شيء جدا ضروري أن الأسرة تكون معنا في خطة التأهيل. الطفل هنا ضحية وليس جاني، لابد أن نتعامل مع هذا، أن هذا الطفل ضحية وليس جاني، وأن مثل ما قالوا يمكن زملائي ريم وأستاذ طارق، أنه الطفل إذا تعلمناه وأهلناه حيكون هو دعاة السلام، في النهاية حنوصل للسلام وحتى نفض النزاعات. فإحنا نقوم على هذه العملية التأهيل، أيضا نقوم على تطوير إبداعاتهم، معرفة ما لديهم من مواهب وإبداعات، حتى نحولهم من ساحات الحرب إلى ساحات التعليم، حتى يكونوا بناة المستقبل في مجتمعاتهم. والآن نعمل على تطوير هذا المشروع. المشروع بدأ في سبتمبر 2017، وإلى الآن تقريبا 840 طفل تم تأهيلهم، ومن الأسر 11,000 من المستفيدين غير المباشرين. والآن نعمل على منذ بداية عام 2019 على تطوير المشروع. التطوير مر بأسس احترافية علمية منهجية بمشاركة الجامعات وأصحاب الخبرة والممارسين في الميدان، بحيث يكون في منظومة متكاملة في عملية التطوير. عملنا تقريبا 12 ورشة عمل، 6 منها في الرياض مع الجامعات المعنية، مع أصحاب المصلحة من الممارسين والأكاديميين أصحاب التخصص، و6 منها في مأرب في المركز نفسه. عملناه مع الأطفال ممن تجاوزوا المرحلة وعادوا إلى أهاليهم، وعملناه مع الأطفال من هم الآن في مركز التأهيل، وعملنا مع الأسر حتى ومع المنظمة الشريكة لدينا، لأن يهمنا أن يكون هناك بناء للقدرات والتمكين للمنظمة التي نعمل معها، حتى نحقق أهداف التنمية المستدامة ويكون لنا أثر مستدام موجود. حتى المدارس يتم تدريبهم على كيفية متابعة هؤلاء الأطفال حتى نضمن إعادة إدماجهم في المجتمع، وحتى إذا تم ملاحظة أي عدم اندماج أو أي سلوكيات قد تعود لهم، إما سلوكيات قد تكون طبيعية مثل الكوابيس أو سلوكيات عنف أو يكون هناك إعادة تأهيل مرة أخرى، لأنه عادة الإدماج موضوع جدا معقد.
And it must be a really difficult job reintegrating these children, but more specifically getting society to stand back from the stigma, because the world may see that child as a ticking time bomb because of what it's been subjected to, what it has seen, what it has taken part in, but also the parents of those children. So what I'm getting at is, how do you break down that stigma in society, and how important is the mother-child bond in helping that child to blend back into that family?
منذ البداية الأسرة تكون معنا ونقوم عمل دورات توعوية وتدريبية لهؤلاء الأمهات. نعمل بعمل التوعية بمخاطر التجنيد وحقوق الأطفال وكل ما يحتاجه الطفل من رعاية، مثل ما ذكر زملائي. الطفل من 3 سنوات يشعر، الطفل من 3 سنوات الأثر موجود. ذكرت دكتورة ريما أنه الطفل ما هو موجود في بداية حياته يستمر معه حتى النهاية، وهذا ما يجب أن نوعي فيه الأسر، وبالتالي ندربهم حتى على كيفية متابعة التدريب معنا في المنزل وكيفية احتواء هؤلاء الأطفال. فالأسرة منذ البداية معنا في عملية التدريب والتأهيل. نعمل لهم ورش عمل متزامنة، حتى المدربين اللي يقدمون هذه الخدمة للأسر نعمل على عملية تدريبهم وحوكمة التدريب، حيث نتأكد أنه المعلومات التي نريدها أن تصل للأسرة وللأم تكون واضحة. الأسر غالباً اللي يكون فيها الأطفال المجندين تكون أسر من فئات مهمشة أو فئات ضعيفة، التعليم فيها أقل، حظهم يكون أقل، فنضطر إلى أن احنا نزيد من هذه التوعية. أيضاً من الأشياء المهمة اللي نعملها مع الأمهات اللي هي والأسر اللي هي التمكين الاقتصادي. نعمل تمكين اقتصادي ونساعدهم على أن يكونون جزء من الدورة الاقتصادية في مجتمعهم، وبالتالي يقومون بمتابعة هؤلاء الأطفال وبالتأكد من عدم اضطرارهم للعودة إلى التجنيد مرة أخرى، إما بسبب الفقر أو غيره.
Thank you very much. And what I'd like to say, again, just from a very personal perspective, being involved in this conversation, it's taken me on a learning curve as well, but it's really the fact that we're talking about groups who are very, very vulnerable and the need to have their voice. We all have a voice, but if you are in that fractured environment, that voice needs to be amplified. And there has to be a recognition of basic rights. It doesn't matter if it's the right to live in safety or the right to good healthcare or the right to an education. It is something that we all take for granted, and it needs to be heard. And Dr. Padmini Murthy, I know this is something that you feel very passionately about because you've written about it extensively, and it's really the importance of those voices of women and girls, the disabled, being heard at every stage of a humanitarian response, not just at the beginning, but all the way through, wherever that journey leads.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to express my thanks to His Excellency King Salman, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Dr. Abdullah, and the rest of the team for this great conference. And thank you so much, Juliet. And just to add on to what my fellow panelists said is, invest in girls and women, it's a ripple effect. So we need to start at the beginning, start at the grassroots. And, you know, I mean, I'm putting on my academic hat here, is we start teaching our students, and we have what is called medical brigades. So it's just not that you're actively at the site, like my honored colleague, Dr. Tariq, was talking about. It's also how you train the younger generation, because they are the torch bearers. So, for example, you spoke about anemia for children. The other issue is, and to add on to what Rima you said, is it's important that the nutrition of the mother, so as a gynecologist who's now in preventive medicine, it starts at the beginning. You need to make sure women are healthy, they eat good. So one of the NGOs I was involved with, who worked in, providing aid, we talked to the local trainers to use the local foods to give them like molasses, candy made from molasses, because they get their protein, they get their iron, because you cannot give them a script for pills and say, hey, go to the pharmacy and fill it. You can't do that. So when we're talking about these, they're simple steps, they're important. You start at the basics. And the other thing is, in answer to your question, Juliet, I know you're wearing your hard journalist hat, and it's great, like you're playing, what shall I say, frisbee with us. So I think
metaphorically speaking.
Yeah. So just to say, I think one of the other things is we need to make sure women are seated at the table, and youth too. We cannot neglect the youth because they have their own, and they are their best advocates. So they need to say that this is what we want. It's just not, when we do aid work, one of the things is it's team building, but it's also making sure there's sustainability. And we talk about the sustainable development goals here, especially 3, which is health for all at all ages. So we cannot separate the child from the woman. It's MCH, it's maternal and child health. So you cannot have a healthy child, you cannot have a development for the child without having the mother involved. I'm not saying that because I'm a woman and a mother, but I think it's like gender harmony. That's what needs to be. We need to work together to promote harmony in the society. And so I think, and it's really interesting, Juliet, that I just wanted to give this statistic that women who use maternal health services are more likely to use other services also for their families and their children. So we have this big movement for universal health care. So it's time we integrate basic universal health care packages to see how we can move forward, not after the aid has, just not when the aid is given, but throughout. So it needs to be cyclical. You need to look at the various issues. And the other interesting thing is, it's not any disrespect to any men. I have great male colleagues. I've been married to a man for over 30 years. But I just want to say that it's a well-known fact that girls and women spend 90% of their earned income on families, much more than men do. So I think it's high time we need to have women at the crux of the table when discussing. For example, in the UN, when the declaration, Rima, with all your work on peace, 1325, one of the things Ambassador Chowdhury did, whom we know and respect, is he made sure women were at the table. So I think even for any kind of thing, as a physician, as a public health person, I think it's so important to have the stakeholders have an equal voice when we discuss these issues. And it's also a good way because the ripple effect goes, so because it's being translated. And Tariq, you said so well that and thank you for being the brave man on the panel. We really appreciate it, and for being such a proponent of gender equality. Thank you so much. Mabruk. My Arabic is very sketchy, but I'm congratulating you and all the other men in the room. I just wanted to say the ripple effect is when you teach a mother, you educate a nation. So it comes down the generations. So this is important. And it doesn't matter, how we educate them, the message needs to go across that. And also to all the stakeholders. You help women, you invest in them, you invest in a healthy society.
And let's take this idea as well of this round table, women sitting around, actually being involved in the decision-making, the strategies, etc. Because I want to focus on women and girls who are marginalised because they're disabled or from indigenous groups, and what should be done amongst the humanitarian and development agencies to reach out to these groups so that they can actually feel that they are part of this process, because what comes out of it is going to impact them too, perhaps disproportionately, but in a positive way.
Yeah, so just to answer very briefly to that, I think it's important, as I would like to reiterate again, we need to have them as stakeholders, and we need somebody who's a representative for them. So that's why it's, it's not that one shoe fits all, Juliet. It's very important we take the needs of different people, especially when it comes to women's health issues, also their reproductive health issues, because adolescents have different issues, older women have different issues, people in the traditional childbearing age have different issues. So I think, and one of the more important things I found during my research, and when we work with our medical students, is to do a local needs assessment. So you cannot go in there with a blueprint and say, this is going to work. One of the things is to be flexible, to do a needs assessment there and improvise, because it's such a fluid situation. It's such a fluid situation. So you need to address it to the best of what you can do. But the basic principle underlying crux of the whole thing is you need to have people there. You need to talk to them. It's not that I'm going there, I've got these millions of dollars, or I am brilliant, I can do what is needed. It needs to be a team effort, and it's like we are in it together.
Can I stick with this idea of needs assessment? Should it extend to humanitarian or development agencies providing safe spaces for women and girls as part of their crisis response? Should that be an obligation on them to provide that?
Definitely it is. Actually, thank you for taking the words out of my mouth. Maybe you read my mind across her. But I think it's really important because they should not feel scared to speak about it. They should not feel ashamed to talk about what their needs are, and if they have any unmet needs, to talk about it. So it's very important to create a safe space where women and girls do not feel persecuted. And the reason I'm also putting girls in along with children is, look at the number of young people in the world today. They are growing exponentially. Even though you have baby boomers, it's the world for them. And I think one of the panelists, and you said, it's important we invest in them because we will not lose so much of money. So even, I'm not an economist, but if you do the math, investing in women and girls today, tomorrow will build a stronger society in, socially and economically, and you have a strong workforce. And I said they are the torch bearers because they will pass it down to future generations.
And I guess that also means in this process, familiarizing women with the fact that they have a basic right to medicine, because all of us in this room, be you male or female, we all know that we have that basic right. But again, when you have a society which is fractured, it is broken, it is rebuilding, that right kind of flies over the head. Perhaps you don't make that association.
Yeah, thank you. One of the other things is, unfortunately, we know we have the right because we are privileged to live in not so fractured environments. But I think it is up to the people who work there, like the volunteers or the staff, to make sure, to tell them that you have the same right as something else. Like you have the same basic right to get your, access to healthcare, your needs attended. So I think this is something we need to, and that's why I was talking about the universal health coverage. And I think we need to have the basic human right premise woven into that fabric so that, it really translates and it's a strong fabric. That means we are laying a strong foundation. I hope I've answered your question.
I think you've answered it coherently and very comprehensively. I'm not going to argue because you are not a lady to be argued with.
Thank you.
But I mean, look, what has emerged, again, reinforcing it, it's been strengthened in this discussion, is that women are a linchpin in these various strategies. And there's been a lot of talk about empowerment, and it's really important in the economic sphere. Now, I touched on that very briefly in the introduction, and Lina El-Sheikh-Al-Mahjoub, I want you to expand on that. But looking at your experience in Sudan, I want to know what is happening there to economically empower women and the tools they're being given.
Thank you very much. Actually, I just want to start with saying that one of the heaviest, as Minister of Labor and Social Development, it's a huge portfolio, but one of the most, the heaviest responsibility, I think, when we're looking at the most vulnerable is when we're looking at children. And I just wanted to share that in Sudan, we have very high stunting levels. I mean, 1 in every 3 children is unable to reach their full potential. And it's really important that we look at multi-sectoral and comprehensive interventions when we're talking about children. And I echo what my fellow panelist has said around the importance of focusing on women and girls. And and since yesterday we've been talking about adopting a rights-based approach, and what does that mean? And social justice, and what does that mean when we're talking about women, we're talking about children, we're talking about people with disability, we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about inclusive growth. And sustainable, the agenda, the decade of action, if we're looking at 2030, we're looking at leaving no one behind. And again, it's about nothing about us without us. And I love that you said, we need to engage our stakeholders in identifying what makes sense and what is relevant. And I think it's very important that we create these safe spaces that are nurturing for whether we're talking about children, we're talking about people with disability or children with disability, or how can we empower women to be able to be best positioned to care for children and contribute to these peaceful and inclusive societies that we talk about. Coming to Sudan, and again, I'm privileged to be representing a transitional government after a revolution that was led by women and youth. And I think we always ask, why is it that women are at the forefront? I think because women really care about everybody and about the society. And it's then what became one of our 10 priorities, to focus on how can we, as a transitional government in these 3 years, focus on ensuring that women get their economic, social, and political participation and empowerment. So when we talk about economic empowerment, I think it's thinking about women's ability to safely generate, access, use, and control resources. It's about choice, and it's about being agents of change. And resources are not only financial in kind or assets, but also time, because time is an issue. So women's ability to control use of their time through labor, family, and childcare, or leisure is also crucial, and are we really looking into that? With this definition, we see that initiatives and projects that mainstream gender equality and women empowerment are expanding. However, initiatives whose primary objective is women empowerment are small in scale. And I think this is what in Sudan we're trying to focus on. It's how can we look at gender equality? What are the things that we're doing? How are we looking at changing norms? Because it's also revisiting legislation that needs to be changed. How can we embrace and adopt international treaties and activities and agreements that basically support women's empowerment? And I think when we talk about crisis, it's also important, that we talk about poverty. It's a vicious circle. We're talking about poverty, we're talking about conflict, we're talking about, women worrying about how are they being able to provide for their children, for their family, and what does that mean, and it's really difficult and harsh. And I think about our situation in Sudan, and we're going through this, we've got protracted crises and a long, I think it's been quite a tough few decades, if not more, for Sudan. And now with the change, we're going through this extreme economic crisis and fragility, which also brings, I think, most women in situation of crisis, thinking about how can they provide, and if we're talking about children, how can we provide for their nutrition? I think that we need to kind of think and remember that a lot of the women in our context, poor countries and fragile countries, they're facing a lot of economic marginalization. So you find a lot of the women are in the informal sector, and they receive low wages and little protection. One of the things that we've done recently, just with the change, is basically looking at how can we support women who work who are tea sellers and food sellers, and they have been the most marginalized. And they've been victims, really. And we said, let's see how can we support through the National Health Insurance Fund, because in Sudan, out of pocket is 70% for health. And it's like one of, I think, we're at the bottom of the list in the world. And this is where some of the areas that there's a lot of stress. So there's a lot of stress in women to provide, to have access to health, to basically good quality, and also then to their children as well. So this is one of the areas that we're kind of focusing on, is saying, where can we invest more so that we ensure that there's less stress in women, there's more opportunity for them.
There's a way of unleashing that potential,
Yes.
by identifying those areas of stress, working on them.
Yes, exactly. And I think also it's about how can we ensure that women receive equal levels of education. And then comes the issue around access to leadership positions, senior level positions, because we have a lot of biases and related to social norms and traditions. So we need to also be looking at that. In conflict and in a lot of different areas in Sudan, because we've been suffering from conflict for long years, you find that women are the sole breadwinners for their family. But access to markets and services is restricted. So their mobility and safety is also impacted by violence, with high prevalence of gender-based violence and sexual exploitation. And as part of their coping mechanisms, women are forced to sell their assets, skip meals, while girls are subject to child labor and early marriages. So that is, I keep saying that it's a lot of different things. It's a cycle, to be honest, and we need to think about how can we intervene at different levels.
But clearly, it is a cycle. You're absolutely correct. You've identified the issues that you have to take on, and you are making a difference. Small beginnings, but that's how big things start. And out of those small beginnings, what I'd like to know is, how is that economic empowerment changing the outlook of women in Sudan? Because something is happening, and I can see from the expression on your face that you're really excited about this, because you're seeing these developments every day.
I think one of the things that, and I mentioned that actually yesterday a little bit, is about how can we support that they have access to credit, to finance, to microfinance, so that they are able to start their own businesses, they're able to grow their businesses, and then therefore are in a better position to provide. How can they also learn to organize, so that they're, societies, cooperatives, and they can access that. And one of the good things about, in our ministry is that we have access to a couple of banks, and microfinance is one of the tools that we're using to make sure that women are empowered. Again, as I said, it's looking at how they're safe. I love that you mentioned safe spaces, because we need to focus more on providing spaces for the different kind of, whether we're talking about women or children or people with disabilities, so that they are able to share, because I think they know best. We keep forgetting that, but I think they know best at what works and what doesn't. I think it's also about how can we maybe encourage that within the humanitarian setting that we're looking at access for women as well.
Okay. I mean, look, this has been I found it a very interesting discussion, and I hope that our audience has also gained something from it too. And as I've said at the start of this conversation, you will have the opportunity to raise some points with the panel and indeed to put questions to them. But I just want to throw things a bit wider now and just put some questions to all of you generally, because again, in my role as the outsider looking in, what I see is that all of you in your own way, you're trying to uphold basic protections under international humanitarian law, certain rights that we all have, which we in the developed world, we take it for granted, and it's trying to really uphold those standards in countries which have undergone some sort of a trauma. And what I want to get from all of you, and it doesn't really matter who responds, but how do you feel personally when you try to protect the sick, the wounded, the disabled, civilians, other groups, and you get people like me looking in and saying, well, it's all very well and good, but you're not doing that great a job, really, are you? Because, I mean, this must be incredibly frustrating because there is a lot that is going on behind the scenes. We don't see it, but it is happening. So how do you feel when people say you're falling short in that responsibility to meet those needs under international humanitarian law? So really, whoever wishes to take it on, go for it. Please do. So audience, if you could wear your headsets, those of you who do not speak Arabic.
القانون الدولي وضع كثير من القوانين لحماية الأطفال. وضع القوانين اللي هو اتفاقية جنيف والبروتوكول الإضافي عام 1977، وأيضا بينت وثيقة مبادئ باريس والتزامات باريس في المؤتمر اللي نظم في فرنسا مع منظمة الأمم المتحدة للطفولة يونيسيف 2007 بالنسبة للأطفال المجندين، واعتبارهم فئات تستحق الدعم الموجود وأن يكون هناك استدامة في الدعم. أيضا اعتمد مجلس الأمن الدولي 2018 القرار 2427. هذه كلها ترسانة من القرارات، ولكن على أرض الواقع ما هو العمل؟ هناك الكثير من الأطفال المجندين سواء في اليمن ولا في السودان ولا في أفريقيا، هناك الكثير من الاحتياج لإعادة تأهيل هؤلاء الأطفال المجندين. من هنا أرى أنه لابد أن تتكامل كل المنظمات العمل الإنساني وكل المانحين على أن يستثمروا في عملية إعادة تأهيل الأطفال المجندين حتى نكون بالفعل أدينا الواجب الإنساني علينا لهؤلاء الفئة، لأنهم بالنهاية هم من سيصنعون السلام، هم من سيصنعون مستقبل مجتمعاتهم.
Thank you. And Rima, please. Yeah, go for it.
Thank you very much. As also my colleague here mentioned, the convention, for example, for early childhood development, we have the Convention on the Rights of the Child, who talks about, children and that children should develop and thrive. And most importantly, the convention reaffirmed that the advancement of societies is inevitably linked to the well-being of our children. And the Convention on the Rights of the Child was ratified by all countries of the world. Most countries, except one country, has not ratified. Also, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. Also, for example, Goal 4 talks about education, the importance of education. And it's historic because it's for the first time it mentions early childhood development, not only as human development, but as sustainable development. So all this is also linked not only to Goal 4, but it's also linked to Goal 5, which is gender development and gender equality. And we mentioned when we empower women and mothers, really it's compatible with SDG 5, which is gender equality. It's also compatible with other goals, for example, Goal 16, building peaceful societies. And most importantly, to really implement this, we need, when we go to the field, to listen to the people, to listen to them, because as I talk to them and we talk to them, they say we're not only victims, but we can be agents of change. You know, families and children and women can be agents of change. And we cannot have sustainable development if we don't work with them, if we don't, as all my colleagues say, empower them. Because we know a mother is the mother who really brings peace to her home, but also bring peace to the society. It reinforces the peace. So we cannot have sustainable development only by signing peace agreements. It's when we involve people, when we involve, and all now the conventions, and particularly we have sustainable development goals that were really at the Security Council, at the General Assembly, and they say we cannot have sustainable development unless we involve youth, unless we involve women, and now we involve children. Children are agents of change. But what we need is to change policies in the countries. We need to change policies, and as we have with us here decision makers, and we have also government, representative of governments, we have to have policies to have universal early childhood development, because this is the beginning. And we have to have early childhood development even in crisis, because children and families in crisis cannot be left behind.
Okay, let's take some, please, go for it, go for it.
Thanks. I just feel that I think everybody else is probably in a under less pressure than I am, answering the question of responsibility, because at the end of the day, we are responsible and accountable as government. And I just wanted to say that it is very difficult. I mean, when you're getting these questions about what is not being done and what is not, and especially now, we've been in almost 6 months in government as part of this transitional government, and from the very first 2 weeks we've been having people asking, why isn't change there yet? Because people have high expectations, and they expect that a lot of things can be delivered. But when we, it's easier said than done, and we can have, we can sign all these treaties and conventions and mention all these commitments. But what does it mean when we're talking? I mean, in Sudan right now, we have more than 3 million children out of school for different reasons, whether it's conflict, sometimes it's just poverty, because they don't have enough. They can't, they don't have breakfast, they don't have food in school, so they don't go. And sometimes because they need to go and provide for their families and help support, so they miss out on school and they miss out on their, on having a proper childhood. And it's not easy when we're talking about a country like mine, where we're going through economic crisis, when we, every day think about how are we going to make ends meet as a government. And then we're also asked about all these children that are not, whether we're talking about children, or even if I'm talking about, fragile or crisis, I think this is fragile, but even crisis situations, we're talking about, displaced people or refugees, and what are we doing when it comes to access to services? And then the question is, what do we do when we can't afford to? But we're still held accountable and responsible. Yeah. But we want to try our best by trying to see how can we make ends meet with whatever we have. How can we have concerted efforts? And I say that the change for us in Sudan is about, it's for the first time after 30 years, we've really inherited a wreck, to be honest, after 30 years of oppression and repression. But how can we, with the resilience of the youth and the persistence of the people, bring together government, civil society and private sector to address these issues together, and how can we make the best use of us for the first time having both a political will and a popular will for change. But it's not easy, and we look we look towards and we look for our friends and the international community to support us in this change for a more peaceful transition for us in Sudan.
An ongoing journey, effectively.
An ongoing journey, and it starts here.
I mean, I'd like to pick up on something that Rima said a few moments ago, and again, I want to throw this open to the panel. It was the word listening. We need to listen. Is this part of the problem, that you can go into a country, a community with the best will in the world to help people, but sometimes there is that risk of thinking that you know better what's needed than those who will have to live in that community, and they have to live with the aftermath of your decisions. And again, I'm throwing this open to anybody, so whoever wants to jump in, please go for it. Who'd like to take it? Please, go for it. Dr. Abdan.
لعلني أتكلم عن تجربة حقيقية لما رحنا عملنا ورش العمل في مأرب مع الأطفال المجندين ومع أسرهم. كان في كثير من الفتيات الصغار اللي متأثرات من الحرب وليسوا مجندات، فكانوا يطالبون أن يكون لهم مكان للتأهيل. هذا غير من الخطط الموجودة في مركز الملك سلمان لتأهيل الأطفال المجندين والمتأثرين من النزاع المسلح، أنه يكون هناك أيضا جزء خاص بالفتيات، لأنه الفتاة أيضا مثل ما يمكن تحدثوا زملائي في الجلسة، هم يتعرضون للكثير من الضغوط، والكثير من الضغوط هذه تؤثر على مستقبل حياتهم وحتى رعايتهم لأطفالهم بالنهاية. فإحنا من المهم كثير أن نسمع للصوت المستفيد، من المهم كثير أن نكون بجانب المستفيد، أن نطور وهو معنا، وأن نقدم الخدمة برضاه حتى نستطيع أن نصل إلى احتياجه، لأن الإنسان يختلف، احتياجاته واحدة لكنه يختلف من بيئة لبيئة، من مكان لمكان، من ظرف إلى ظرف.
And that's an important point, isn't it, to listen, because if you go in there with a set of assumptions, you can actually, I would imagine, create some form of hostility precisely because you're making assumptions about what people need and how it's going to work in the long term. Is that a fair observation on my part, or, I mean, who's experienced this? I mean, who'd like to comment on that? Please, go for it, Lena.
Thanks. I just want to re-emphasize listening. I think when we do, you know, a lot of times we don't really listen because there are so many different levels of listening. You know, at best we listen to respond, but are we really listening? And I think there's a lot of local knowledge that we need to tap into because people know best. And as has been said, that there is no one solution that fits all. There are differences from one context to another. I remembered one of the in UNICEF Sudan, they had a very they had a really good experience on social innovation and social innovation workshops and skills for children, and girls and young girls and boys in different settings. So also in some of them are refugees, and some of them are IDPs, and they came up with these amazing solutions. So it's really about how can we listen and and it's part of the empowerment as well, that we ask them what could the solutions be, and then we support having these solutions take place. And I think, again, when we talk about listening and how it's important for us to learn to listen, because a lot of conflict is because we're not listening. So maybe this is one of the things that we kind of, when we're talking about spaces and we're talking about nurturing these spaces, it's spaces where people can listen to each other. Thank you.
And let's stay with this theme of listening before I open things up to the audience, because Dr. Gerg, I mean, I know that in the work that you do, you're effectively saying that when you're supporting education in emergencies, it can't be the sole responsibility of one entity, that everybody has to work together for the common good. So really, this is the power of partnership, finding the right people to work with and also listening to those on the ground. So how do you see that making a difference? More specifically, when you see that difference, what does it look like in the areas where you're working?
Look, without partnerships in any context, it's not going to work. And yesterday we had two panels. They emphasized on partnerships and not working on silos. David Beasley emphasized on it a lot. The WHO, regardless of the question of the coronavirus, if there's no partnership and a collaboration globally on this, it's not going to work by itself. WHO cannot solve the problem. China cannot solve the problem. No one can do. So when it comes to early childhood development, let's say, in fragile context, I spoke earlier about a holistic approach, about an ecosystem that has to be built so we can solve the problem of the early childhood development, and that's also involved with the mother. And Pudmini also mentioned the importance of involvement of the mother. I mentioned it earlier. So building that ecosystem is one. Once we have that ecosystem built, now who builds that ecosystem? Is there a framework that we go as a country and we say it's ready and let's come and attach it? No, it doesn't exist. So I'll give you two very quick examples. So there's a global fund called Education Cannot Wait. It's a UN fund. It is founded by the UN Special Envoy for Global Education, Mr. Gordon Brown. I'm a co-founder of that as well, and with Gordon and some others. UNICEF, Global Partnership for Education is also part of it. On the global board, we have a lot of agencies, including UNHCR and some other countries as well, donor countries. And what we look into is Education Cannot Wait has two main missions. One, in any emergency, we all know that education is neglected. That is 100%, and every single parameter under education, which includes ECD and women. Everything is neglected because everything goes towards health, nutrition, safety, shelter, and so on. I'm not trying to dwarf the importance, but education is as much important. So what we do as Education Cannot Wait, which is a UN fund again, we go and we prioritize education. We go and we do collaboration on the ground. We get all the players, the host country, the Ministry of Education, UNHCR, the World Bank. We get the two main humanitarian, that they co-chair the humanitarian clustered response globally, which is UNICEF and Save the Children. We get INI. INI is a consortium of 15,000 members, from education practitioners to teachers to experts in education. They go to any emergency, and based on their framework, which is attested by the United Nations, they assess the education needs in there. That ties into nicely towards Education Cannot Wait, and Education Cannot Wait gets all the players in, and we go ahead and we set the framework. So I come back to the framework set. Number two, what's the second problem when it comes to emergencies? There is no money. You go to the powerhouses and you tell them we need money, and because of the bureaucratic system, you don't get money. They look into it, they need 6 months to look into it, and they need another 6 months to take a decision, and those are 12 months, so 1 year have passed. What's good about Education Cannot Wait, it gives you immediate deployment of funds, cash on the ground to get the immediate education response. So that's Education Cannot Wait. Number two, we have Global Partnership for Education, GPE, which has a board of countries and some donor organizations. We were the first ever non-government organization to fund the GPE, and we did a few lobbying with the UAE for 4 years, and we managed to get the UAE to be the first ever Arab state donor also to the GPE, and hopefully I have some meetings here in Saudi. I'm going to lobby for the Saudi government also to join the GPE. What they do is very simple. They are the largest non-government donor towards education globally. They fund ministries of education in lower middle income countries and below, and they go into the education sectorial plans, and they fund those, which includes a lot of parameters and a lot of competencies as well within their system. So these are the two main things. And without the partnership, without the involvement, it would not work. And Juliette, if you would allow me, because my fellow panelists, they were talking about a few things, and I want to elaborate on a few things with regards to inclusivity and women education and disability, if I can have 2 or 3 more minutes.
Sure, and then absolutely, and then we'll throw it open to the audience.
Sure,
I know there's certain people who do want to ask some specific questions to you.
Sure. Inclusivity and equality is very important. And maybe not a lot of people know the importance of it. And let's talk about ethnic minorities I have mentioned. In a country that you have a lot of ethnic minorities, you don't give them support, what are you expecting? They're going to stay quiet, being farmers, sweeping the floors, the streets? They're not going to stay quiet. One day a problem will happen. It will erupt. That's one. You're going to go to religion. I'll give you one example of the UAE. We have a Ministry of Tolerance. We make sure that everyone is equal. Whatever religion, whatever faith you have, and its own sects, everyone should be equal. My daughters, when they go to school, they're mixed with so many girls and boys with different faiths and religion. They don't speak about religion or anything, but it is the culture, it's the mix, it's the nexus, which what we're talking about in this forum as well. It's the nexus on how the government puts this as equality. That's when it comes to religion. You want to talk about disability? They get nothing. Zero, zilch. In Uganda, we have a program. In Bosnia, we have another program. We targeted those children. Not only the children, we built the capacity of the Ministry of Education to have policies for children with disability. And we start at the early years, early childhood. Don't come to a child who's 18 years old and you say, now I will help you. 18 years and you're not able to do that, you're handicapped. No, there's no use. You start from the beginning. So we built centers that train teachers to deliver upon these specialized training. Dr. Amal tapped into psychosocial. Psychosocial is so important. Psychosocial and socio-emotional, two different things, but they fall under the same family. That is also important. And I'll just wrap with the last point, which Pudmini mentioned earlier, girls' education and the importance of educating the girl child. I just want to take you to a journey right now. Imagine a girl who's not educated, and she grows up, most probably 90% she will not get a job, she will not get an income, she will get married between the age of 14 and 16, that's the average, and she gets children. 90% of those children will not see education because it's the women who take care of the children. It's not us, the men. It's always the woman. And because she's not educated, she doesn't know the importance of education, 90% of these children will not get educated. And then the domino effect, you know what's going to happen in that nation.
Of course.
Let's take now the mirror side of that. Imagine that same girl gets education, grows up, finishes school, gets a job, gets married, not at her early years, but maybe in her late teens or early 20s, gets married, gets children. You're telling me this educated child who became the educated mother in the future, who got a job and has children, she will not insist that all her children will get education? So what are we talking about? We're talking about we can solve the education problem globally in 1 or 2 generations, 10 to 20 years. We can solve the problem. How? Educate the child today.
Right, and that's
the girl child.
Okay, the girl child. Okay, and this girl, actually, well, I'll defer to this girl, and then I'm going to throw it open to the audience. Padmini.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tariq, for saying that. I just wanted to add, yes, but we need to make sure there's drinking water and separate bathrooms for girls to go to school. Because if you don't have a separate toilet facility, the girl will not be sent to school because of safety reasons. So I think that is in addition to what you said. That's why it's like a 3-dimensional puzzle. You're building it up. You need to address these factors, the basic factors. Yes, then you're addressing SDG 3 and you're empowering the girls, SDG 5. We can make this change, but it's a multi-sectorial, wide approach where, as you said, the private and the public sector, academia, United Nations, everybody comes together, donor organizations, and that's what we all work under the same umbrella because we are working for a same cause. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's now time to open this conversation to the audience. Quite a few people want to start. Can I go with this lady here? And I promise we'll get the microphones to you, but if you can stand up, please introduce yourself and the organization you represent, and please put your question to any member of the panel. Sorry, we can't hear you. Mic problems, technical problems. We're going to get there. Excellent. Please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Rima Abdul Wahab. I'm working at Princess Noura University, the director of Disability Support Service. As I'm hearing all of you talking about minorities, ethnic minorities, thank you, Dr. Tariq, for mentioning that. And even other populations where they are in crisis, if you are not taking care or taking them into your plans, they might be in other groups where they might feel that they are not taken care of. One of them is individuals with disabilities. I insist of using individuals other than only children, because the whole spectrum is all important. I know early childhood, I'm with you, Mrs. Rima, on the importance of taking account early childhood, because you're gonna solve a lot of problems later on. But if we are not taking them into our consideration, our programs and measures, as I'm reading in the Convention on the Rights of Individuals with Disabilities, called all countries to build on their programs and measures to protect this population in crisis areas. Yesterday, I was taking a tour in the booth, and I was specifically asking for these programs. Is there any programs that are taking care of this population?
Right, so are there programs which are actually meeting the needs of the disabled?
Yes, individuals with special needs. Yes.
Sure,
yeah,
please go on.
As the literature said, poverty is a big factor. Plays with individual disabilities. So most of them, they're poor, and they're maybe in an area of crisis or in wars. They're gonna be probably the most vulnerable. Like there's like layers upon layer upon layer.
Right, okay, so I think we can see what you're getting at. So who would like to take that on? Please, Dr. Habdan.
أطفال ذوي الإعاقة هم أطفال في المجتمعات المستقرة يعني عندهم مشاكل ويحتاجون إلى تدخل يعني بكفاءة عالية وبطريقة احترافية ومهنية. مركز الملك سلمان يكون دائما لما يتدخل في مشاريع إما التعليم أو حتى مشاريع الحماية، يكون للأطفال ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة من خلال المجموعة حظ فيها ونصيب. ولكن بالأمس الحمد لله وقعنا اتفاقية يمكن مع اليونيسيف خاصة فقط للأطفال ذوي الاحتياجات الخاصة في لبنان، بحيث أنه نقدم لهم كل الخدمات المتكاملة، لأنهم من الفئات الضعيفة والتي تحت الظروف النزاع والكوارث يكونون هم الفئات الأكثر يعني استجابة للتأثيرات، حتى قد تكون اندماجهم في جماعات أخرى مثل الجماعات المتطرفة أو حتى الجماعات اللي يعني تقوم بالعنف. فوجود الكثير من المشاريع في العمل الإنساني للأطفال ذوي الإعاقة جدا مهم، ومن المهم أن يكون لنا فيها دور قوي، ومن المهم أن نضعهم يعني في الميزان وليسوا كجزء من المجتمع، ولكن أن نوجه لهم خصيصا هذه البرامج.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And I know that quite a few people want to ask some questions. I do apologise because there are some microphones, but I think because the room is so large, it's very difficult to reach you. But there's a gentleman over there, and there's a gentleman here, so it depends on the quick, there's a gentleman over here who has a microphone. We will get to you, but if you could introduce yourself and the name of the organisation that you represent, and indeed put your question to a member of the panel. But I promise we will try to get a microphone to everybody else. I do apologise. And now our microphone isn't working. Oh dear. Another one is on its way, reinforcement, even better. Excellent.
Thank you, ma'am. My name is Stephen Sequeira from the UN Office of Counterterrorism. I wanted to direct my question to Madam Townsend. The UN Counterterrorism Center was established with a generous grant of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 2011, and we're very aware of this discussion that's been going on. And I also want to thank all of the panelists for a really phenomenal presentation of some of the key issues. If a fraction of the money that's been spent on counterterrorism was spent on some of the issues you were raising, we would make a lot of progress. In terms of some of the programming that we're looking at, the question of returnees, particularly some of the women and children associated with ISIL in the Al-Hol and Roj camps, is a key concern for the United Nations and for Secretary General Guterres. And we're now looking at the UN Counterterrorism Center at a number of programs that could help with reintegration and rehabilitation of these children and women in countries that are able and willing to take them back. And we're working with all sorts of partner agencies, many of the ones that were here yesterday, to try to bridge the humanitarian development and security divide. So I'd really like to hear from you what types of efforts would be effective and how we could do more together with everybody in this room to try to prevent some of the situations that will exist if these children and women are not effectively rehabilitated in a more comprehensive manner.
Okay, so Francis Townsend, please.
The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has spent an enormous amount of time on the rehabilitation of the actual terrorists themselves. And, you know, one of the things we've learned, whether it's with criminal recidivists or terrorist recidivists, the fact is you're never going to be 100% successful. But the fact that you're not going to be 100% successful is not a reason not to do it, right? Because if you're successful with one, then the program is worth doing. On the women and children, it's different, right? Because you are more likely to be successful. One of the things in the child soldier area that so impressed me, you know, we had a whole discussion here about listening, and one of the things we have not talked about is listening to children. I think we underestimate the importance of actually listening to children, and one of the ways you do that is giving them paper and crayons. Honestly, I mean, it sounds ridiculously simple, but you give a child a piece of paper and a crayon or a pencil, and you ask them just to draw, and it's a way for them to speak to you and to actually articulate what their fear and what their trauma is. That was my experience. I was a local prosecutor, and when a child was the victim of a sexual assault, you gave them dolls, and it was the way that they articulated their trauma to you. And so I would say to you that when we look at the reintegration of women and children, we have to think of ways of allowing them comfortably to articulate their trauma. It's the first step in any reintegration and rehabilitation process is they have to be able to articulate their trauma so that you can deal with it and you can begin to give them access to the services that they need, that they require. There is not going to be one size fits all, and so you have to have an array of services, medical, psychological, society, economic, a whole array of services, a suite of services that will allow them this reintegration process. I also think you have to allow yourselves the flexibility. It's also not going to be one size in terms of time, right? It's not going to take, it may take one person a month, it may take another 6 months, depending on what their experience has been. And I think we're not very good. We have a program that has a particular lifespan, and I think we're not very good at being flexible, and that would be my other piece to this. I think we have to allow ourselves the flexibility to address the individual need.
Okay, and I know that you wanted to respond to that question as well.
Yeah. We have to look at the current problem and the possible protracted issue that's going to happen in the future. The current problem, I think we all spoke about it, it is early childhood development, early childhood education, and we start with the child today. This child, most probably, in these contexts that we're talking about, will remain in these contexts for at least 15 to 20 years. So if we take care of these children, if we embed the right messages into the curriculum on what we teach them today, we can avoid a catastrophic issue in the future. So that is given, and I think we all agree to that. Let's look into the current problem, which is the youth of today, basically. The youth of today in these contexts, what's happening with them? They're energized, they're sparked, they want to be heard. We were young one day as well. We were the same thing. Maybe because we were in normal settings, we had different activities. But this young guy or young girl, they are in a camp, most probably. They're in a war zone, most probably. And whenever there's conflict, especially the geopolitical situation of that area, surrounded by militant groups and armed groups, militias, whatever you're going to call them, they become baits to these organizations. So what we have to give them, we have to empower them. We have to involve them into the community centers that are built into these areas. And if you don't do, they're a ticking bomb. They're a time bomb. They will explode. Because they go on YouTube and they see what's happening in the world. A Syrian boy who's 17 years old today was about, 8 years old when the crisis happened? He didn't understand anything. There were hardly any iPhones at that time. The iPhone 1 came out in 2007, but anyways. So there was nothing. And then until these apps developed, and those children, the youth of today, they're looking into what's happening in the world, and they're seeing what's happening in the West, in Asia, and the Middle East. Everyone is happy. They're going to malls, shopping, exercises, sports, and driving and racing and doing whatever all people are doing, and they're not doing anything and sitting there. And we're not providing with a single activity, and they're not heard, and they're not involved into any decision. Of course, they're going to explode. So that's what we have to tackle. That's today, and the ECD to avoid a future catastrophic issue.
Okay, so preemptive action. Now, we've got about 4 minutes left, and I want to squeeze in 2 other questions. Now, can we give the microphone to this gentleman here in the grey suit? Very, very quickly, please, because time is tight. I do want to fit in another question. Please, introduce yourself. Microphone problem, I'm afraid. There, working.
شكرا سيدة المديرة. بداية أود أن أشكر المتحدثين جميعا على ما قدموه لنا، لأن هذا الهم الإنساني الذي نعمل فيه منذ سنوات طويلة. الحقيقة أنا أود أن أشير أو أوجه الاهتمام إلى فئة من الفئات التي نحن بصدد الحديث عنها، وهي السيدات الأرامل اللي يعولن الأطفال والمطلقات، خاصة في حالات ما بعد النزاع المسلح. هذه الفئة دكتور طارق تحدث عن أشياء تتعلق بالشراكات. اللجنة الإسلامية الهلال الدولي مهتمة بهذه الفئة، وتحتاج إلى أنها هناك مشروع أيضاً يتعلق بالاهتمام بالسيدات في كوسوفا وفي بلدان كثيرة. الأطفال اللي يعيلوا يحتاجوا إلى مساعدة ويحتاجوا إلى اهتمام. فما هو البرنامج اللي يمكن، نحن قمنا بدراسة تتعلق بهذا الموضوع ونحتاج إلى شراكة في هذا المجال، وممكن الدكتور طارق يستطيع أن يفيد الجميع في هذا المجال. شكرا. متحدث الدكتور محمد العسبلي من اللجنة الإسلامية الهلالي الدولي.
Thank you so much for that. So very, very briefly, so that we can squeeze in one last question.
I'll speak in Arabic.
Sure.
مرحبا أخي. شوف أنا زرت مخيمات، أنا زرت مناطق نائية، أنا زرت مناطق فيها نزاع، أنا زرت مناطق فيها كوارث أوبئة، وجلست مع جميع أفراد المجتمع ومنهم النساء. أنا أتكلم من آسيا إلى الشرق الأوسط إلى أفريقيا إلى أمريكا اللاتينية، جلست معهم كلهم. أنا وصلت لين فنزويلا على المشكلة الفنزويلية في كولومبيا، يعني لين هناك وصلت. وجلست أكثر الناس، أكثر الأشخاص، أكثر الفئة اللي جلست معاها هي الأمهات، سواء آخذ رأيهم على الأطفال أو آخذ رأيهم على أوضاعهم هم كنساء وكأمهات، سواء أرامل ولا مطلقات ولا زوجات. في الحالات هاي احنا ايضا لازم نمكن المرأة، وتمكين المرأة في اماكن مثل هاي. المرأة ايضا يعني بالها مشغول على ابنها، لا في غذاء، لا في صحة، لا في سكن ولا مأوى نظيف. النظافة مش موجودة. بدي ما تكلمت عن النظافة ومرافق غسل الأيدي والمرافق الصحية المعزولة بين الأولاد والبنات. فأنا بوجهة نظري اللي شفته أن إذا نقدر نشغل المرأة بأكبر قدر مستطاع، إحنا بنقدر نحل المشكلة. كيف؟ كل مرأة عندها حرفة مهنية، فعلى الأقل خلنا نمكن ونطور قدراتهم المهنية. خياطة بطور الخياطة، حرف بطور الحرف. والله العظيم رحت مخيم الزعتري، رحت في ورش عمل في الكوميونتي سنترز هناك في مخيم الزعتري، شفت جيش من الامهات خياطه 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 خياطه. قلت لهم انتم شو تسوون في الثياب؟ انتم في مخيم معزول في اخر الدنيا في الاردن في الصحراء، شو راح تعملون في هالخياطه؟ قالت كل بنت راح تتزوج بالمخيم راح تلبس فستان العرس من خياطتنا، وهالفساتين يشترونها بمبالغ بسيطة جدا. فأنت شو قاعد تسوي؟ قاعد تطور الذهن، قاعد تنسي، قاعد مثل ما تفضلت الدكتورة أمال على، سامحوني ما أعرف الكلمة بالعربية، قاعدة تحل مشكلة السايكوسوشيال. السايكوسوشيال مش فقط في الأطفال، إيفن حتى في عمر المراهقة، وأيضا في العمر الأكبر، فتشغلهم، فتعطيهم، تمكنهم في المهن والشغل والاحتراف في المواضيع. فهاي اللي أنا أقدر أشوفه، إن كيف نقدر ندخل الأم. وأيضا الشيء الثاني إن ندخلها في المراكز المجتمعية، على أساس تكون على أساس الناس يستمعون لما هي تقول. تكلمت أيضا الأخت بخصوص الموضوع أن لازم تكون المرأة والبنت على الطاولة، لازم نتكلم، لازم نسمع. إحنا ما نريد رجل يجلس على الطاولة يتكلم شو المرأة تريد، ما نريد ناس كبار بالسن يتكلمون عن المراهقين أو الشباب شو الشباب يريدون، لا، نريد الشباب على الطاولة. فهاي هي.
Right. Can I jump in? Because again, we have to be very, very quick, but I know that, again, there are two responses forthcoming to your question. So please, Dr. Habdan and Dr. Salih, I know that you want to respond. Well, who goes first? Who would like to go first? Okay, very, very quickly, please.
Yes, as an answer to all the questions, it's starting with early childhood, and UNICEF has community centers, as you mentioned. For example, in Ivory Coast, in Uganda, after the war and after refugees came back, and it involved women and mothers and empowerment of mothers, and so the children are bringing the mothers together. And a mother from the Ivory Coast said, this center has helped me. The services with all the children, talking about inclusion, all children from all groups together, from different fighting groups are together. It has helped me to understand others, and we will not have war anymore. We will not fight each other anymore. We have to take care of the children and go to our fields, and we are now secure that we will not have war. I wanted to give this example.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Habdan, very briefly, please.
يمكن أنا رحت المغرب ورحت لبنان ورحت خبرتي يمكن أقل من أخوي طارق، لكن بالفعل ما ذكره الأخ طارق، فإنه الأمهات الأيتام يحتاجون إلى حرفة، إلى توعية. إحنا عملناها ووجدناها، وعملت استدامة في عملية كفالة اليتيم وتعليم هؤلاء الأمهات بالحرف التي يحتاجها السوق في مناطق النزاع اللي موجودة. فإحنا ندرس المنطقة إيش تحتاج وإيش عند هذه المرأة من حرفة، والأولاد كيف ندخل لهم بالتعليم والتوعية والتثقيف زي ما ذكر أخوي طارق، ونشتغل معهم. عندنا الكثير من البرامج، عندنا في سوريا، وعندنا في السوريين في لبنان، وعندنا حتى في مأرب وفي الزعتري، وكلها نتائجها رائعة. فبالعكس هذه من البرامج ترى الجميلة ولا تكرر في كل مكان.
Right, thank you very much. And sadly, time is the enemy. And I'm afraid we've run out of time. I'm so sorry, because it's 11 o'clock, and unfortunately, I can't take on any other questions. But I do apologise, sir, because I know that you waved your hand furiously and you wanted to get a microphone to you. So please, 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 I do apologise. I'm so sorry. But look, time is the enemy, but I want to wrap up on a positive note. And these are really the final recommendations that we've gleaned from this panel. First, the increased investment and multi-sectoral support for young children and caregivers in crisis and displacement settings have immediate and lasting impact on the protection and advancement of child rights and the creation of future peaceful and stable societies. Beautifully eloquent referred to, in fact, eloquently referred to by our panel. And finally, investment in early childhood is imperative for the fulfillment of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, related obligations, as well as the attainment of multiple sustainable development goals, something I think we can all agree on. Can I thank the panel for their excellent contribution, the passion they've brought to the debate, reflected, I think, with the audience that so many people wanted to contribute. Time went against us. So Dr. Rima Salah, His Excellency Dr. Tariq Al Ghurk, Dr. Amal Habdan, Dr. Padmina Murthy, the Honourable Frances Townsend, and Lina Sheikh Omar Majoub, thank you so much for your contribution and enjoy the rest of the forum. Thank you. And if you could please stay with us because there is another panel, and I'm just going to nip over to my perch